The rain had finally ceased, leaving the Amazon jungle draped in a suffocating mist that clung to every leaf and tendril. Dr. Elena Ramirez wiped the sweat from her brow, her fingers trembling ever so slightly as she adjusted her glasses. Her meticulous notes were smudged from the humidity, but her determination outweighed her discomfort. Beside her, Dr. Marcus Lee scanned the dense foliage with a glint of excitement in his eyes. "We're close," he whispered, his voice barely piercing the thick silence. Dr. Sarah Thompson closed her eyes, breathing in the heavy air, sensing the ancient whispers that seemed to emanate from the very soil. Dr. David Miller trailed behind, his skepticism masked by a furrowed brow. He was a man of rocks and hard facts, and this expedition was testing the limits of his practicality. They stumbled upon the cave entrance almost by accident. A gaping maw hidden behind a veil of vines and moss. An unspoken apprehension passed between them. "This isn't on any of the maps," David muttered. Marcus grinned, his adventurous spirit ignited. "That's what makes it exciting." Elena hesitated, her analytical mind racing. "We should proceed with caution," she advised. Sarah placed a hand on the cool stone, feeling an unsettling energy that made her stomach churn. "There's something ancient here," she whispered. Ignoring the growing unease, they ventured inside, their flashlights piercing the darkness but barely illuminating the vast expanse before them. The air grew colder as they delved deeper, the walls adorned with peculiar markings that Sarah struggled to decipher. The path narrowed, forcing them into single file. Suddenly, Elena froze. "Do you hear that?" she hissed. A faint hissing sound echoed around them, indistinct yet undeniably menacing. Marcus stepped forward, his foot brushing against something slick. He shined his light downward, revealing a cluster of shed snakeskins, each larger than the last. "Anacondas," he breathed, a mix of awe and fear creeping into his voice. David's face paled. "We need to leave. Now." But the labyrinth seemed to have shifted. Passages they had taken moments before were no longer apparent. Panic began to set in as the hissing grew louder, more defined. Shadows flickered along the walls, hinting at massive forms slithering just beyond their sight. Elena's mind raced. "We have to move calmly," she urged, fighting the urge to run. "They're sensitive to vibrations." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing like a drum in the silence. She could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in, the walls seeming to close around them. Marcus clenched his fists, anger at his own recklessness boiling beneath the surface. "This is my fault," he whispered, guilt gnawing at him. As they inched forward, the ceiling suddenly writhed above them. An enormous anaconda uncoiled, its eyes glinting like obsidian flames. It dropped between them, separating Elena and Marcus from Sarah and David. The creature's presence was paralyzing. Elena's fear of losing control surged as she struggled to steady her breathing. David's fear of entrapment became visceral as the walls seemed to seal them in with the beast. Sarah reached out across the void, her voice shaking. "Don't make any sudden movements." The anaconda's tongue flickered, tasting the air inches from Marcus's face. Sweat trickled down his temple as he fought the instinct to flee. In a sudden, horrifying moment, more shadows emerged. The den was awakening. Dozens of anacondas began to slither from crevices, their massive bodies weaving a living maze around the scientists. The group's fragile composure shattered. Marcus bolted, pushing past Elena. "Marcus, no!" she screamed, her voice echoing uselessly. His footsteps reverberated through the cave, the vibrations stirring the serpents into a frenzy. Chaos erupted. Anacondas lunged, their movements a blur of scales and muscle. Sarah grabbed Elena's hand, her eyes reflecting sheer terror. "We have to find another way out," she urged. David's rational mind splintered as he watched a serpent pursue Marcus into the darkness. In the labyrinth of tunnels, the trio stumbled upon an underground river. The faint glow of bioluminescent fungi cast eerie patterns on the water's surface. "If we follow the river, it might lead us out," David suggested, clinging to logic. Behind them, the sounds of Marcus's fate were mercifully obscured by the rushing water. They waded in, the cold seeping into their bones. The current pulled at them, but the hissing was distant now. Hope flickered. Elena felt a surge of determination. "We can make it," she affirmed, more to herself than the others. But as they rounded a bend, the river plunged into a chasm, a waterfall disappearing into inky blackness. Despair settled over them. "It's a dead end," Sarah whispered, her voice hollow. The realization threatened to crush them. Suddenly, from the shadows emerged a figure, Marcus, battered but alive, his eyes wild. "I found an exit," he gasped. Relief cascaded through them. "How?" David questioned, suspicion lacing his words. Marcus gestured frantically. "There's a passage above the waterfall. We can climb." Trusting desperation, they followed him, scaling the slippery rocks. As they ascended, the cave began to shudder. Rocks tumbled, the den seemingly reacting to their escape. They burst into the open air, the jungle never looking so welcoming. Breathing raggedly, they collapsed onto the mossy ground. The morning sun pierced the canopy, bathing them in golden light. "We made it," Elena sighed, tears streaming down her face. But as they gathered themselves, Marcus remained silent. Sarah turned to him. "Marcus?" He met her gaze, his eyes devoid of recognition. "Who are you?" he murmured. A cold dread seeped into their hearts. David stepped back. "This isn't right." Before their eyes, Marcus's form began to waver, his skin taking on a serpentine sheen. "Thank you for leading me out," he hissed, his voice melding with that haunting sound. In a horrifying realization, they understood. The anaconda had taken his form, using them to escape the confines of the cave. The creature vanished into the jungle, leaving them staring in stunned silence. The weight of their actions settled heavily. They had not only disturbed the den, but unleashed something far worse into the world. Elena's fear of losing control manifested in the most twisted way. Sarah felt the crushing weight of the unknown, now a reality she couldn't comprehend. David's skepticism shattered, replaced by an unimaginable truth. The jungle's sounds returned, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, all oblivious to the silent horror that now dwelled within it. They were left with the haunting knowledge that some doors, once opened, can never be closed.